Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Rev Limit Podcast, episode number 4. We are officially into the weekly habit now. We've been doing this for a month. I'm Anthony Muniz, your host, and joining me is Bryan Carey. Bryan, how are you doing?
I am doing fantastic, Anthony.
Excellent. That's always good to hear. And also with us today is Corey Davis. Corey, I hope you're also doing excellent.
Yeah, just getting over this racing hangover from the weekend. That was a busy day on Sunday.
Yeah, we did. We had a long weekend of racing. We had the long race at Silverstone for the Blancpain Endurance Championship, although that was definitely overshadowed by the Indy 500 and Monaco Grand Prix that happened on Sunday. Both of those drawing quite a bit of buzz on the internet. The Monaco Grand Prix we'll talk about first. We don't really have our normal segments this podcast because we just have a few main talking points, or topics rather, that we want to discuss. So we'll kick it off with the Monaco Grand Prix, then move into some Indy 500 post-mortem discussion, and then actually take you around some of the upcoming races that are happening both in the real world and the virtual world. So we'll start off Monaco Grand Prix. Rosberg wins it. Spoiler alert. He joins the list of three-time winners, which is also on that list is names like Senna, Graham Hill, Schumacher, all of those, some big names that are on that list of three-time winners. And Rosberg actually wins it 3 times in a row. So that's pretty impressive, actually. Although the reason that he did win it was another Mercedes, we'll call it misjudgment by the people on the pit lane, and that was actually caused as a result of a crash by Max Verstappen fairly late in the race as he was working his way past Romain Grosjean. So guys, initial thoughts on kind of the whole race series, or the whole weekend there. Was I actually enjoyed watching the qualifying session. It was pretty fun watching those guys do some hot laps, but the actual race was pretty kind of bog standard until we got to the end. What is some of your thoughts on the race?
Well, my thought for the actual quality of the racing at Monaco, I do enjoy it. I mean, you kind of accept the fact that there won't be a lot of passing. It's a tight street circuit, same basic layout. Obviously, there's been changes, but same basic layout since the late 30s when they initially had the race. So, I mean, there is that interest to it, knowing it's almost impossible to pass. So you have pit stop strategy, but there were some times during the race, Max Verstappen's violently aborted attempt to pass Grosjean aside. I mean, Ricciardo made a pass on Raikkonen. A little questionable, obviously, there by contact, but I mean, that's kind of how Monaco works. There was some other, kind of wheel-to-wheel action. It was a little bit more, I mean, you're not going to get 30, 40 passes a race. I mean, that's just not going to happen. DRS is useless there, but I thought the racing action was okay.
Yeah, I think a lot of times at Monaco we sort of wait around for the safety car, and this one I wasn't necessarily waiting for that. I thought the racing, at least behind Hamilton, who pulled out a pretty good lead, was actually pretty good and pretty close, and then got the surprise safety car there from Verstappen's move. So he was made a similar move on Maldonado earlier in the race in turn 1 there. Managed to make that one stick, but just barely. They both just managed to squeeze through there, so probably a little bit over-eager move on Grosjean there near the end, but definitely set up the exciting finish, like Anthony talked about. So, guys, what was Hamilton's pit crew thinking bringing him in there? Obviously, they thought they had the perfect lead to be able to come in and out without a problem, but was there really even any point in trying that? Why take the risk?
Well, the one thing that I don't think got talked about a lot at the time of the race, and it kind of came out bits and pieces there, is essentially it was a quick judgment call. The team could have overruled him. The team wanted him to stay out. The team initially said, no, stay out. And Hamilton's response was, no good. The tires are cooling off too much. So at that point, from the team's point of view, going, oh, we're not going to bring him in. It's like, oh, he wants to come in. Can we do it? Short period of time to make the decision. They said, bring him in. I mean, it wasn't quite a request from Hamilton to come in. The team explicitly told him to stay out. And his reply was, no good. The tires are cooling down too much. So at first, you kind of think it's like, wow, the team really screwed over Hamilton there. They brought him in. They really shouldn't have. But Hamilton's got to play his part in that as well. I mean, it's a symbiotic relationship between the driver and his engineers in the pit wall, and the engineers in the pit wall didn't want to bring him in. Hamilton said, well, I don't like how the tires are cooling down. and they made a quick decision, the incorrect decision, but they made a quick decision to bring him in, and it didn't work out for him.
Yeah, this isn't the first time they've done this. The same kind of error with the pit lane this season. If you remember back at the race at Malaysia, they had a similar incident where arguably Ferrari still kind of had the advantage over Mercedes during that race because of the way the tires were being used with the heat. But they gave up a lot of track position, and it really put them far behind the Mercedes cars, where they definitely had no chance to catch up once they were able to get through all of the slower cars. Even despite the Mercedes advantage, which was still fairly significant, there was nothing they could do. This, I think, is something that, I mean, we hear on the radio, we hear Hamilton making a lot of comments. He's pretty vocal on some of his radio calls, and he is kind of very reactionary, where he'll say something about a mistake or something that he did and say like a qualifying or something, but then that he can keep going, and the problem isn't really as big as a problem as he might make it out to be on the radio. So this is kind of like, well, yeah, the tires are cooling down, but the guys behind you are also going to be cool, so there's no reason to actually say, oh, even if you might want to come in, well, there's really no reason to, especially since the other cars weren't going to. I mean, if you saw, he was on, fresh super soft tires with about 10 laps to go, if I remember correctly, once the safety car finally did come in. So yeah, and he had no chance to get by Vettel at all. I mean, so despite the fact that he was on new tires and Vettel was on old tires, he actually pitted the last out of those top three drivers. So, I mean, he was on newer tires than they were, so if he stayed out, he would still be at less of a disadvantage, even if the guys behind him did change tires. So there was really, in no scenario was that a necessary pit stop, even if his tires were cold. I mean, it should have been an instant, no, it doesn't matter if the tires are cold. There's about 10 laps left once we're done with the safety car. Everyone will be on the same strategy as you. It's Monaco. You have the car advantage with our, and it's kind of like, there was no reason whatsoever, even if Hamilton was kind of calling for it.
Yeah, the worst case scenario there, if he had stayed out, is that he doesn't get clear by a second of Rosberg. Rosberg stays within DRS range, pretty much stays close to him for the rest of the race, and probably doesn't try a move, and Hamilton wins. So that's I think, I can understand the heat of the moment. A driver would say, yeah, I need tires, but at a race like Monaco, that's a one-stop race, it's probably the hardest race on the calendar to screw up a strategy, and he screwed it up.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, and if you look at it, he had like I said, he had the least amount of wear on his tires. So there was no, even if he was a second behind, he and Rosberg are in the same car. Like Brian mentioned, kind of in his opening thoughts, DRS is ineffective here. We saw it assist probably no cars really in making a pass here, so it was completely pointless. I mean,
yeah, like I think part of the issue too is, like I said, it happened pretty quickly, and Hamilton's insistence at the time was he figured that the other two cars were pitting, which the team obviously knew they weren't, but they thought they had the thing in hand. So like I said, there was a series of errors, but the one thing after the race too, I was reading some comments. Toto Wolff was actually doing a question and answer on Twitter, where I was very impressed with Toto. Normally his post-race comments and all that I like to poke at because they seem kind of asinine sometimes, but he did a really good job answering these questions. And the one thing that came out of that I wasn't aware of is the Mercedes has one guy doing the strategy for both cars. So it's not like you have, two teams, two sets of engineers figuring out what's the best strategy during the race, because they don't want them to feel disadvantaged. Whereas, I mean, you have two drivers racing each other, but really maybe if they had two teams racing each other and they had direct communication strategy-wise with their own engineers, maybe this problem doesn't happen. Maybe there's not as many layers they have to go through in such a quick period of time, like a short lap of Monaco. Hamilton wants tires, pace car's coming around, they have a decent-sized lead. It's like, do you pit him right now or not? Driver wants it. Do we need it? They went with a pit stop. Didn't work out. I think if they cut away that layer and just let each, individual car, driver, and their engineer combo worry about the strategy, then you might not see this happen.
So I don't want to really pass the blame off of Hamilton or the team, but this is also an interesting case where we saw the virtual safety car. One of the first times we've really seen that in a sort of late race situation like this. Do you think that played any role in that decision, or I guess the bad calculation that they had made?
The pit stop decision, again, to this Twitter conversation, came after the full safety car came out. So the virtual safety car didn't, according to at least Toto Wolff, none of that discussion happened. That virtual safety car was deployed, quote unquote, for a relatively short period of time before the actual safety car came out.
I personally actually would have liked to see them utilize that more because it was because of where the crash was at. I think it was, well, I guess probably the reason they actually deployed the proper safety car was because it was in turn one and they wanted to kind of lead the F1 cars through kind of the like where the pit exit essentially goes through around the other side of the curbs there to kind of keep it away. But I actually would like to see them use the virtual safety car more often. It's starting to be used in other series. It was actually used a couple times in the Blancpain race at Silverstone, and I thought it was pretty effective. They also use it. They've started implementing it for the WEC. It's quite effective around the Le Mans circuit because it's so big, and rather than having 3 safety cars out at a time to pick up a number of different cars, it just works a lot better that way. And they use it at a similar type of thing at the Nürburgring where there's like yellow zones where you have a maximum speed. So I think it's probably a good idea. And I hadn't actually seen that specific question answered on Twitter that Brian was talking about where it didn't play a part. Yeah, I actually thought it did, where they thought, okay, well, we have the virtual safety car. We definitely have enough time now to take the pit stop. And then they kind of like just after they said, oh, it's a virtual safety car. Oh, no, wait, it's going to be a real safety car now. Apparently that happened. The pit discussion happened after that. So
yeah, I think it's on the Mercedes AMG Twitter feed. Although I could double check later and we can maybe link it. But to the one point I will make about why they went to the actual safety car from the virtual safety car here in Monaco, as soon as they make the call to bring out the medical car, the safety car has to come out. And Verstappen had a big enough hit that, the initial thing is like, okay, there's a car in the barrier. Because they're not going to have a replay necessarily up in race control. They might not be watching the incident right away, not knowing how severe the hit was. So they make the call, there's a car in the barrier, bring in the virtual safety car. But he hit that pretty hard, so they made the call that they needed the medical car out there as well. And as soon as that comes out, the safety car has to come out. They can't bring a medical car out under a virtual safety car, as the rules are right now.
So that's kind of our thoughts there on the whole Mercedes situation. I think this kind of highlights that there's still a decent number of issues that they need to kind of work out with the whole management side. And we've seen with 3 people, Toto Wolff, Paddy Lowe, those multiple figureheads that are trying to lead that team. I think we've talked about this actually before on this podcast, where they kind of need to kind of figure out how they want to lead that team and stop making kind of some mistakes that they shouldn't be making. But since we're talking about mistakes, let's quickly talk about Verstappen. What do you think about that crash? It reminded me of a number of moves that we saw made by Daniel Ricciardo, except he was able to do the moves properly instead of crashing into the guy.
Well, I think Corey mentioned it earlier. Verstappen made the move on Grosjean's teammate Maldonado and made it stick. So it's kind of reminiscent of a few years ago with Sergio Perez. He was making move after move at Monaco. Now, on some tracks, say Monza, whatever, those are relatively high percentage moves. You get close enough, you outbrake someone, there's enough room for both guys to get through that. Monaco, the percentage of passes that are successful are much lower. So yeah, you could probably pull it off once, maybe twice, but start doing it more than a few times and just the law of averages will catch up with you. And late in the race, Grosjean was defending for points at the time. Verstappen's going for points. Grosjean defended Verstappen a lot more aggressively than Maldonado did at the time. And he is still a rookie. He's been great so far. He's been solid. He's been made good overtakes, not a lot of mistakes.
Just on that point, I'd like to point out that I think he's doing a better job than some of the guys in Sauber have been doing this year, and they've been they've been around for a little bit longer than he has. So
they've come out of GP2, which is just crash fest. Honestly, I understand the pressure of a single spec series. You're trying to make it the next step to F1. You have to make a name for yourself. But the quality of driving in GP2 is probably the worst in any series you could ever see. Just the respect that the other drivers, well, the lack of respect other drivers show each other it's unreal. And yeah, you have a lot of successful guys coming out of there, but they tend to be a lot more aggressive. Nasser and Ericsson in particular, I mean, that's just the kind of racing they're used to, and you really shouldn't be doing that in Formula One. But Verstappen, I mean, he just misjudged it. It was a violent accident. Sucks for Grosjean to kind of ruin his race a little bit, but at the same time, I mean, Verstappen was the one that ended up plowing into a wall at over 100 kilometers an hour head on. So I think that's a lesson learned. We'll see if he makes that mistake again, but I would doubt it.
Yeah, from the onboard, you could tell it was absolutely just a split-second decision to pull out and make that pass. And around such a tight track at one of the fastest parts of it going into turn one there, just no room for error, and there was an error. So unfortunately, the consequences were probably more severe than that move deserved, because, again, he pulled it off earlier, but just trying to make that late move. So, and I don't want to take anything against Verstappen's drive, because he's been impressive his rookie year, and I hope that these kind of mistakes don't continue, because I'd like to see him stick around, and I think he could be one of those exciting drivers, like one you mentioned, sort of like Ricardo was. So you never know. Maybe we'll see that by the end of the year and in the next few years if he sticks around.
All right. Well, that kind of wraps up our discussion of the Monaco Grand Prix. It definitely turned out to be a bit more exciting than I think some people were expecting it to be. But let's move on to the other mega race that happened over the weekend, was the Indy 500. If you didn't happen to catch the results of that, it was Juan Pablo Montoya who took the win. Will Power followed in second, and Charlie Kimball was the last person on the podium. There were some crashes that happened. Actually, kind of a few of them actually reminded of things that happened the one time that I took part in the iRacing Indy 500 year or so ago now. So, guys, what did you think of the overall race of the this year with the new car, or the new aero packages and stuff like that from Honda and Chevrolet?
Well, it's as far as Honda and Chevrolet, actually forget the Honda Chevrolet part. The Chevys of Penske and Ganassi were just absolutely dominant. They were not by time significant margin, but clearly the top cars in the field. I mean, it was. Well, I'll go back into that later. But the other, I think Ganassi had 5 cars. Penske had 4. One of Ganassi's cars was Sebastian Saavedra, and honestly, he's I'm sure a nice enough guy, and he unfortunately had an accident where he hurt his foot, but he's just not IndyCar quality driver, unfortunately. Sage Karam, on the other hand, 20-year-old from Nazareth, Pennsylvania, the home of the Andretti's in America there. So a lot of hopes riding on him. He was in Ganassi, had great practice speed, was really looking like he had a good chance in the race, good as anyone out there. And Takuma Sato, a veteran of IndyCar and Formula One, pulled off one of the, if not the stupidest lap one moves I've seen in a long time. Basically, it's a 500-mile race, going into lap one, going into turn one. The biggest goal of everyone is you're not going to win the race in turn one. You can pass guys the entire time through. Montoya ended up winning from being back in 30th right at the beginning of the race pretty much, and came through to win. So it can be done. What Sato did was went into turn one. In the middle of turn one, it's not like he entered turn one side by side. Ryan Hunter-Reay was on the inside, Sage Karam in the middle. Sato decided, hey, I'm going to try to drive around these two guys going 3 wide through this corner for no particular reason other than I'm going to run into someone. There was no other way that was going to turn out. I don't understand what thought process went through his mind when he decided to try to stick it around the outside there. He didn't get caught up in that position. He willfully entered it. He was the third guy in, and he ended Sage Karam's day at the first corner, and would have been a great story, for American open-wheeled racing if a 20-year-old kid from Nazareth, Pennsylvania had won. But Sato took care of that with a incredibly boneheaded move.
Yeah, I did enjoy the post-crash interview that he had, where I was glad that he called him out for that move and how I think his words were idiotic it was, or something like that. But that was
I didn't think he was going to try something that idiotic, I believe is what he said.
Yeah, that's what it was. Yeah, but I mean, it was an apt criticism, because even someone like myself who does not really follow oval racing at all knew that was not a good idea. So.
Yeah, like Sato had become a hero for Indy fans, if people only follow the 500. 2012, last lap, he had a chance to pass Dario Franchitti, put it up the inside. gave each of Franchitti, squeezed him down as far as he could. Sato, 2 wheels in the grass, tried to make it stick. Could have easily run up into the side of Franchitti and more than likely put Franchitti up in the wall and won the race. He didn't. He made sure he didn't run into him. He ended up spinning and missing out, but it was such a ballsy move on lap 200 of a 200-lap race that he earned a lot of fans there. And then here in the 2015 race, kind of threw that Indy goodwill away, but lap 1, turn 1, did the exact opposite of what a ballsy move was and turned that around to an idiotic move.
Yeah, I think Sauter never got the message that even though you start 3 wide at Indy, you're not supposed to stay like that for much longer after turn 1. But also interesting sort of the implications of that early caution, because they're about to go back to green, and then further back in the field, there's contact under the caution laps when Simone de Silvestro got into the back of Juan Montoya. So obviously that would affect the complexion of their race, and especially for Montoya's race, because up front early on, like Brian said, we watched the pretty early separation between Dixon and Canan from the Ganassi team, and then the likes of Will Power and Simon Pagenaud and even Castroneves for Penske's team, pretty much control it at the front. Montoya has to come and make the rear bodywork repairs, ended up in the back to 30th place. So I can't imagine what was going through his mind, knowing his teammates were fighting for the lead and he was having to work through the field. But that early wreck again really changed the complexion of the race and forced Montoya to be that aggressive style that we know him to be. We'll probably talk a little bit more about this when we talk more depth about Montoya in a minute. But Brian and Anthony, what do you make of Montoya's drive up through the field to get back to the front with his teammates and eventually pull this one out?
I just think he's people get on, and like I said, we're going to be talking the next segment. We'll be talking about Montoya specifically, but really that drive there, the opposite of what I spoke about with Sato, which again Sato should know better, but Montoya, the thing I take away from that is you count up to the 500 miles. You're at mile, 10 at this point when he has this incident. He's back in 30th, which is at the time his last place. I mean, the 3 guys behind him are out of the race. There's no one behind him at this point. So, okay, what do I need to do to get to the front? He didn't try to make a charge in 10 laps and 15 laps. He just slowly, he knew he had a good car. They're working on it, but he could pick off guys, car by car. There's 29 cars ahead of him. He's still got 190 laps left, 185 laps left. He knows he doesn't have to pass all those cars in the next, 10, 15, 20 laps. He knows he has a whole race ahead of him. So as long as he doesn't drop back, as long as he doesn't get involved in incidents, he has that experience now to know, and I think this is where his NASCAR experience really came in, is just have the patience. Okay, you've got this number of laps. You know what you have to do. Go do it. Don't try to get it all done in a couple laps. Get it done over the race, and he did.
There were definitely some cautions thrown in there that aided him as well. I think at one point he was still trying to work through the field, and then the caution came out, and about half the cars ahead of him came in. That put him in the top 10. But yeah, like you said, Brian, I think it would have been easy, and I might even talk about this as far as Montoya's NASCAR career goes. He's had races at the Brickyard before in a stock car that he threw away because he got back in the field and just tried to get too much at once. So maybe that experience helped him. Maybe, just he had a good car and the race fell into his hands. But definitely an impressive drive from him. And then the battle at the end, first with Dixon and Power, and then eventually just with Power in the final laps, was absolutely awesome. One of the best we've seen at Indy. We can compare it last year to Castroneves and Hunter Ray, but absolutely on edge, all 3 of those guys at the finish. It was a lot of fun to watch. Yeah,
so what is your favorite, both of you, what is your favorite moments from the race? Was it Montoya's charge from essentially the back of the field to the front over the entire race, or was there a specific moment that you thought was really good? What do you think this year's Indy 500 will be the most memorable moment?
Well, there's the passes at the end. Power going to the front around Dixon, then Montoya passing Dixon and passing Power almost immediately. Those were pretty impressive moments. But my particular favorite moment was a little bit more obscure. It was when Montoya was behind Dixon. I think he was chasing him through turn 2, and he was sawing at the wheel. Like, he had that car sideways. It was wiggling. Like, he was inches, less than inch, like just milliseconds away from turfing it into the wall, and he held on to it. That's the thing about Indy is when you're seeing F1 cars or even Indy cars driving around street circuits or even short ovals, you sometimes see them, correct slides, their wheels sawing back and forth as they're trying to correct the car. You never see that at Indy, and he was behind Dixon, and I think it was probably, I wish I could remember how many laps left. I want to say like 8 laps left when it happened, but he was following him through turn 2, and the wheel was just sawing in his hands, and it was massively impressive. I think I yelled out loud and scared the crap out of my son who was sitting beside me, who didn't quite understand the nuance of why Dad was yelling so loud, but it really impressed me.
And I'll look to those exciting passes at the end. This is a race where we knew, just with the differences in aero styles with these cars, that the passing wasn't going to be quite as easy. It was going to be done mainly right at the end of the straightaways going into the corners, and you knew as the race wound down, you'd probably get some of those moments where guys are taking chances. But we absolutely saw that at the end. I was watching the race with some family and friends, and it got down to where it was the battle between Dixon and Power and Montoya, and I said, just watch this finish. This is going to be classic Montoya. And he had some of those moves, had me on the edge of my seat, but he pulled them off. Power had done some similar moves. Even Dixon on the restart made a great move to get back to the lead. So I think just the battle after that last restart is going to be something we'll remember from this race. Thankfully, no late caution, which seemed to be a sort of a plague at Indy for a few years where we wouldn't get a green flag finish. But last 2 years we've gotten those, and this one didn't disappoint.
All right, well, we've kind of had a good recap of the Indy 500, but let's kind of delve a little bit deeper into the actual winner's background. Montoya's had a very long motorsport career so far, and he's definitely not finished yet, but he's been involved in the old kart series, and he made a jump to Formula One, had a stint in NASCAR, which is a pretty big change to go from F1 to NASCAR. And then now he's racing in IndyCar and actually having a pretty successful time at it. So why don't you guys take your turns and talk about some of your memories and some of Montoya's triumphs and possibly failures throughout his racing career?
Yeah, well, I'll start off here. I'll go through the open wheel stuff a little bit first. Let Corey comment a little bit as we go through, and let him take over more of the NASCAR, because I really don't know a lot about Montoya's NASCAR other than knowing he was doing it. But actually, the point that when Montoya really first came to my radar is, and I'm going to see if we can find this on YouTube, and maybe we can find the link. We can link it below. But I believe it was 1998 when he was battling Nick Heidfeld for the Formula 3000 championship. And it was at Hockenheim. Back when Hockenheim wasn't the kind of neutered stadium, Tilke, I don't know if Tilke designed it, but I assume he did, because I'm not a huge Hockenheim fan now. But when it used to shoot out into the forest, you take the first corner, long straightaway, chicane, another long straightaway deep into the forest, another chicane, come back, another long straightaway, and then back into the stadium section. So it was a really low downforce, high speed, narrow, fast track. And I believe Montoya passed, I think, 2 other cars with all 4 wheels off in the grass at like 200 miles an hour in Formula 3000. And it was one of the more impressive passes I've ever seen in any motorsport. And he held on to it. I was like, okay, well, this guy's something. He's got something going on there. And then Formula One didn't happen for him. He had tested for Williams. It was a possibility for him, but I think they chose to have Zanardi come in from IndyCar or kart at the time, because Zanardi had initially been in Formula One, went to the United States, ran kart, impressed greatly there, won a couple championships. He's the next biggest thing. They brought him back to Formula One. So Montoya went in and basically backfilled him in IndyCar, Ganassi. And first couple races weren't that great. Like, he was doing okay. Come to Long Beach, and he just dominated the field. It was a very impressive drive. He just led from the front. It was incredible car control that he displayed there, and really parlayed that the rest of the season in 1999 into a kart championship. Didn't finish some races, but when he did finish, I think he won 7 races that year. Then 2000 in kart, he didn't have a great season. They switched to the Toyota engines, and the kart season didn't go that well. He still had a couple wins, but there was a whole series of DNFs. I think he DNF'd the first 7 or 8 races. But that year, that was the year of his first Indy 500 win. This is before, most of the big teams like Penske and Ganassi and Andretti Green and all that had come back to the IRL at the time. They were still in the kart, but Ganassi, it was the first year that a big kart team went to challenge the IRL teams, which had been driving at Indy exclusively from 96 until 99. Let's be fair, they're the lower class series, lower class teams. They had the Indy 500, so it was kind of a big deal that way, money-wise, but they didn't have the talent. So they bring Montoya in there in a car he's never driven. I mean, it's still an open wheel car on a track he's never been to. For the rookie testing that they normally have, he just did a couple laps. He's like, "Yeah, I've got this." They somehow signed a waiver for him. I don't remember all the details. Shows up, leads 167 of the 200 laps, and it was probably the most dominant Indy 500 performance I'd ever seen as a rookie. He won it. It wasn't a big deal. He didn't quite appreciate the scope of the race. That's back in 2000, and I mean, people didn't like him. He was cocky. He'd basically come over there from the kart side and dominated, but really that was his stepping stone, his final stepping stone to come to Williams in 2001, to which, again, his kind of cocky, I don't care who I'm driving, I don't care what's happening attitude. I think it was first couple F1 races. Not great, not bad, but not great. Come to Brazil, and he pulls an amazing move on Michael Schumacher going into the SNS' turn 1 there at Interlagos, and basically shocks the world at the point because no one had gone wheel to wheel and challenged Michael Schumacher like that. I mean, Mika Hakkinen had some battles with him, but that was the first time anyone had really challenged him and won like that going wheel to wheel. Unfortunately, Max Verstappen's father, Jos, pulled pretty much the exact same move after he had been lapped and rode up the back of Montoya going into turn 3, ruining Montoya's race and his chance at a first win. But that was back in 2001, and then from then on, he didn't win a championship in Formula One, but from the 2001 to 2005, or no, 2006, to 2006 when he left Formula One, he was probably one of the top drivers the entire time there. So it was middle of 2006, falling out with McLaren at the time, made a massively surprise move to join Chip Ganassi's team back in NASCAR, to which I will pass it off to Corey because that's the part of Montoya's career which still confuses me, but it happened.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if anyone really understands the logic behind that, and even now, after looking at his NASCAR results, I'm not sure if anyone could say that was a great move. But, it helped diversify his resume, and Montoya made a pretty immediate impact in NASCAR. He had run just a few races to get used to stock cars at the end of the 2006 season. Then he came out in 2007 and was running, of course, full-time for Ganassi's Cup team, but also ran just a few of the lower-level races in what was then the Busch Series, and made, I guess, a pretty bold move in one of his first races. This is when NASCAR went down to Mexico City to race on the Hermanos Rodriguez track, but coming down to the end of Montoya's first race there, he basically bumped his teammate Scott Pruitt out of the way to win that one. So I think everyone at that point sort of saw what Montoya was capable of, but also that driving style that he might bring to NASCAR. So we would see a little bit more of that over the years, but as far as Montoya's Sprint Cup career, he did win on the road course at Sonoma in 2007, went a couple years after that really without much great results, although 2009 he did make the chase for the first and only time in his career. Didn't win any races that year, but still had an impressive season on a lot of the oval tracks that he was only seeing for maybe the second or third time ever. Also won again in 2010 at Watkins Glen, so those were his 2 Sprint Cup wins. I don't judge him too harshly because he only won those 2 races, because if you look at what his teammates did with Ganassi's team during that same span that he was in NASCAR, they only won 4 races, and 2 of those were either Daytona or Talladega, which are sort of lottery races anyway. So it just, at that point, Ganassi's Cup teams didn't have the equipment to be able to compete with the top dogs, and to an extent, I still don't think they did. Even with a talented guy now like Kyle Larson, you just can't run up front with the Hendrick guys on a week-to-week basis. But getting back to Montoya, he really became a force to be reckoned with anytime they went to a road course, and also he had run for Ganassi's team some in the Grand Am series, especially at the Rolex 24. He had always put in these incredible stints. A lot of it would be late night, overnight, or early in the morning. If you're a driver in a slower prototype or a GT car, you didn't want to be in Montoya's way, because he'd make sure you got out of his way pretty quick. And I forget what year it was, but at one point they were talking to some of Montoya's teammates in the Daytona prototype, and I think it might have been Jamie McMurray, who had said he wished that they had a banner on the back of the wing on the car that said who was driving then, so everyone would know when Montoya was in the car and they wouldn't blame the other teammates. But there's also a pretty memorable moment, the first Brickyard Grand Prix for the Grand Am series, where Peter Barron, the owner of the Starworks team, was just furious because his car and the Ganassi car with Montoya driving had had an incident down at Turn 1 at the Indy road course, gone, on TV on his interview and said, "Oh, we told the Grand Am officials that this was going to happen. They just brought Montoya in to wreck the other cars." But, I'm sure that wasn't true, but still, it was always exciting to watch Montoya run in any of those full-bodied stock cars or sports cars. Another thing worth mentioning is that in Montoya's Sprint Cup career, he had a few wins that got away, and I alluded to this earlier. There was one time when he was at the Brickyard 400, he basically had the race won. They came down pit road, no need at all to push anything, but he got caught speeding, and then that put him back in the pack. And then a little later, I think he was trying to charge back to the front, tried to get too much, and then wrecked out. And there was another year also, I think it may have been the next year, this was back in 08 or 09, he probably should have won at Indy. He had a fast car and just could never put it away. So there were several times, in addition to those races, a few other races he was leading in the late stages, and either there was a caution or he got passed or something. So he was in contention for wins in NASCAR. Another thing I think worth noting about what he did in NASCAR, even though he only had those 2 wins, is that in qualifying he actually won 9 pole positions, and a lot of times he would try lines around the track in qualifying that the rest of the field just wouldn't do. He would find ways to make speed on the track, again, in cars that were probably less competitive than really he deserved based on what he had in Champ Car and F1s. That sort of sums up his Sprint Cup career. Again, I think he probably saw the writing was on the wall, because 2013, he was 37 years old, realized probably his NASCAR prospects weren't really going to improve, so made the big move back to get to IndyCar with Roger Penske's team. So Bryan, he's been in IndyCar now for a little over a season. He's already won a couple, or 3 races actually. So what do you make of his return to the open wheel ranks?
Well, at this point, it looks like he's leading the championship, and I would say he's an equal favorite for the championship. I mean, you can't count out, Will Power. You can't count out Scott Dixon over the course of a season. I mean, you're going to have things that are beyond their control that'll happen, DNFs, things like that. But his form so far, he's been steady, consistent, and above all fast this year. He took the time last year to learn. This is what I was talking about during the race. I mean, the Montoya of old would have just charged to the front, like you said. And last year, coming back to IndyCar, he's okay. He's a little older. He's 38 years old now. When he comes into IndyCar again, he knows he doesn't know everything. He knows in his own abilities, but he's like, listen, this is going to come. I'm going to take the time to figure this out. By the end of last season, he was one of the top drivers anyway. And coming into the season, what I take from this is he's come back and he's right at the top end. He's right at the peak of this thing, and could very easily, and in fact, likely win the championship this year.
Yeah, it's also interesting, I think, to compare Montoya with Power just over their careers. Power was a guy we've always known could run well on the road courses. Won a ton of Champ Car races, and then came IndyCar races on road courses. Took him a while to get settled into his groove on the ovals, and of course had some of those memorable races in the finale at Fontana where he'd had problems or wrecked and basically lost the championship because of that. So obviously Power's improved on the ovals now, and he's a contender anytime they go there. But with Montoya, like you mentioned, Bryan, the first few races of his career, he comes out, and if he won at Nazareth and he won down in Rio de Janeiro on their sort of parallelogram oval there, and I think he won a couple other oval races that season, maybe the old flat Chicago Motor Speedway. So, we've known Montoya growing up from the road course background that he had that talent, that ability, but also the way he took to the ovals, both in Champ Car and, like I said, with NASCAR, being able to get up to speed as quick as he did. I think that shows definitely his talent, his ability, and it also makes me think of some of the other guys who have made the moves to different series like that. If we go back to the 70s and 80s, you had Emerson Fittipaldi, who jumped from F1 into Champ Car, and then Nigel Mansell did the same thing in the early 90s. Jacques Villeneuve had done it. Tony Stewart had sort of done it. It came from the early days of the Indy racing. They could jump to NASCAR. But Bryan and Anthony, what do you guys think about Montoya compared to some of these other guys who have shown that they can succeed in multiple different series, even in some cases different cars?
Aside from the fact that he didn't do as well in NASCAR as he would have liked, I think he's, out of those guys, between Fittipaldi would be the only one that I would say would come close. I mean, he's a 2-time world champion. He's a kart champion. He's won, a couple Indy 500s. But, Nigel Mansell had success winning the kart championship in '93, coming off a Formula One championship. Villeneuve, same sort of thing. But overall, I think Montoya was the more, complete package out of all these guys here. Tony Stewart, I mean, he was open wheel racing. He was, came out of midgets and whatnot. Road courses, yeah, he does all right in NASCAR and road courses. But, I mean, I think out of those guys there, Montoya, multidiscipline, probably the best of that group that has been in IndyCar, been in Formula One, been in NASCAR. And keep in mind, Jacques Villeneuve has been in NASCAR too, just not very successfully.
Yeah, I think you have to respect someone that is willing to venture out and try so many different disciplines of racing. So, if you only follow motorsport casually, you might think, oh well, if you're good in one, you could probably be pretty competitive in the other styles. And really, it is a completely different discipline. Going from Formula One to say the move to NASCAR that he made. That's two completely different racing styles, different technology in cars. And I know, like we've all of us have said, he wasn't that successful, but to give it a try and to not be at the back every single race and actually be somewhat competitive, and he to actually grab a couple wins during his stint in NASCAR, I think is impressive. And I think he definitely rubs some people the wrong way, but you also need to give him props when he deserves it, and I think he definitely deserves it for his driving.
And I think we've seen since then that road from road coursing into stock car racing is not an easy one to hoe. It's not just Montoya that's had trouble. If you look all the way back to the late 90s, early 2000s, Scott Pruitt had tried it, really with no success. Boris Said had tried it for a while. He'd won one of the, I think, the nationwide races in Montreal, but really no success otherwise. Since then, we've seen Marcus Ambrose come, as a proven V8 Supercar champion to test himself in NASCAR. He won a couple Cup races at Watkins Glen, but no real oval success or wins to speak of. AJ Allmendinger is another guy who grew up with Champ Car, finding pretty early success there right after he moved to the Players Forsyth team. In one races there, he's won one race in NASCAR again, also on a road course. So I definitely commend Montoya for giving that a try. I think again his results don't necessarily speak to his talent there because he didn't have the equipment, but still I think it's not just him that's had problems changing discipline like that. And I think all the guys that have done it, he probably did it about as well as anyone.
All right, well, we've had a pretty good discussion there on Mr. Juan Pablo Montoya, the winner of the 2015. In case you heard that, as a firework, because it is just after Memorial Day here in the States, and people do some fireworks here for that. Yep, little leftovers, So, Montoya wins the 2015 Indy 500 after a pretty exciting race. So that was a good kind of discussion about the race and look back at some of Montoya's previous racing history. So, Corey, the Coca-Cola 600 did happen. As our resident NASCAR viewer, the notes you sent me leading up to this podcast was, and that's it. So, is there any bit of that race that you want to talk about?
Well, yeah, that pretty much covers it. It's NASCAR's longest night of the year, and if you watched it, it felt every bit as long as it's advertised. And this is a case where it used to be a race of endurance, where these cars were barely made to go 500 miles, and there were very few 500-mile races on the calendar. So an extra 100 miles at one of the fastest tracks of Charlotte was absolutely a test. And at the end of most of these, you'd end up with huge attrition, very few cars left on the lead lap. One of the memorable races from back in the 1960s was David Pearson, the NASCAR champion, leading on the closing lap, has a problem. I think he might have blown a tire or something on the last lap, and he's basically creeping along the final lap to try to finish. Ended up just barely beating the second place guy across the line. He's going way slower. So over time, that race has just lost that sense of the appeal of it, and that it's really no longer an endurance test. These cars, the engines now are made to go that long and much longer, so you don't see a lot of guys dropping out. And then sort of the extra set of issues that sort of came to the fore over these last 2 weeks of racing at Charlotte is that the current rules package for NASCAR, with still fairly high downforce, they cut downforce in the off season. The teams basically re-engineered that back into the cars. and also less horsepower means that the cornering speeds are higher than ever, and really everyone's going the same speed around there, so there's very little passing. If there was any sort of saving grace to this race, it's that it didn't come down to the fastest car winning. There was a late caution with a little over 60 laps to go. These cars around Charlotte can only do, say, 55 to 60 laps on a tank of fuel, but a few guys stretch that. So your winner, Carl Edwards, is a guy who took the lead at lap 380. He hadn't led since lap 1 or 2 of the race. So, again, just a guy who managed to survive, was able to save some fuel at the end, and took the win, his first of the year. But, yeah, it's kind of sad coming off what was a pretty exciting finish at Monaco and a pretty exciting Indy 500 the whole way through. That what was, and still is the longest race of the Memorial Weekend has sort of become now the biggest snoozer of the three. So, yeah, I don't know. Maybe that can be changed with rule changes. It doesn't look like NASCAR is all that eager to make big changes for next year because they've said they don't want to try something if they don't have a firm idea of what it'll do. So. I don't know if any of you guys had a chance to catch any of the race. If you didn't, I don't blame you. But what do you make of the Coke 600 and what it's become and sort of the mess NASCAR's in with the way these rules are and drivers talking about how tough it is to pass?
I actually have a fairly good contrast to that. I know you've mentioned this used to be kind of like the endurance racing race for NASCAR, and how basically as technology has gotten better, the cars are more reliable, and we're seeing that kind of across the board in motorsports for endurance racing. The biggest endurance races that are based in Europe with the WEC and the Blancpain Endurance Championship, all of those racing series have basically become whatever the race distance is, sprint races, because the technology of our cars have evolved so much to the point where we don't get a lot of technical failures anymore, and the cars can pretty much be just completely pounded lap after lap of as fast as the drivers can push them, basically. So it's actually interesting to hear the NASCAR side of things, because in my opinion, the endurance racing has gotten better in the WEC and the Blancpain Endurance Series, where now it's 3 hours of intense racing where it's not, you're holding back at 95% until you get to that final 40 minutes or so, and then you push the car because you feel like it's going to make it to the end. It's 3 hours of fast GT racing, or 6 hours of fast prototype passes left and right, and trying to get yourself into the best position to be ready to win at the end, because it still can come down to that final half hour. And in my opinion, the improvement of technology has made it a vast improvement in those racing series, where NASCAR has kind of made it it's been more of a detriment almost, which is an interesting comparison. Like you said, I did not happen to catch any of the Coca-Cola 600. Sounds like I didn't miss anything, so thank you, Corey, for sitting through at least part of that. But yeah, I think that's actually interesting, and NASCAR probably does need to take a hard look at what their current rule set is right now, because as it is kind of with Formula One at the moment, the viewership numbers are starting to drop. I mean, I don't think it's as serious a problem as Formula One is facing at the moment, but NASCAR is kind of, I guess you could say, at that point where they might want to think about switching things up a little bit to see if they can't kind of keep with the times and change things up a little bit, so longtime fans can kind of continue to be interested, and there's something new that might convert, some new things that might convert people that didn't have a previous interest in stock car racing.
Yeah, and to your point, Anthony, first I'll say this was apparently the lowest television-rated Coke 600 that wasn't delayed by rain in something like the last 10 or 12 years. So it's definitely reaching that point where I think they have to do something. Also, I think you're absolutely right about usually that sort of sprint race over a long race format tends to lead to some pretty good action. I think one reason it doesn't in NASCAR is because when those drivers are pushing every single lap of the race, it's sort of a side effect of the rules they have, where to go as fast as they are in the corner, Goodyear has to bring in a really hard tire there that doesn't wear much. So because they don't have a lot of tire wear during a run and during the race, they're able to push that hard. So again, no one's able to pass because they're all going hard. So sort of the old timer, NASCAR fan like me who remembers back how it was, say 20 years ago, really misses the days where tires would wear during a race and you couldn't push that hard every lap because you'd wear your tires out. So really, if they're able to make some of the rules changes to get take some of the downforce away and get that passing back in there, I think that'd be nice to see too if they could bring sort of a tire back that wears more, so it does encourage more of that, I guess, calculating style where you can't use up all your stuff right at once. You have to save a little bit over the race.
Yeah, that's actually a good point because the way that stock car racing is the cars are. I mean, again, correct me if I'm wrong because you are much more knowledgeable on the series than I am. But stock car racing is generally the cars are generally the same with subtle manufacturer differences. Correct?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Really, the biggest difference is under the hood, and at this point in NASCAR, you've got basically four major engine manufacturers. There's a couple that work with Chevy engines. It's the Hendrick Motorsports and Richard Childress Racing. There's one main Ford provider, and that comes from Roush Yates, and then one main Toyota provider, which is with Joe Gibbs or Toyota Racing Development. So, yeah, basically, it's almost like you just have four different engines out there with pretty much exact same bodies on the cars.
Yeah. So, I mean, like you said, you do get some subtle differences with the engines, but they're built to a spec, and the bodies are basically the same, like you said, with the slight variations that they are allowed. And I think that they do need to look at things that can change up the racing. And you brought up the way that Goodyear, the tires that Goodyear has to bring to that race, and I think that might be an area that they could also look at where. The way that Pirelli is told to make tires for Formula One right now, it might not be, there's a lot of people that can go either way, that yes, they should kind of make these tires that degrade fast, and then you get a lot of pit stops to try and spice things up, or no, you need to make tires that are going to last a long time, so that way the drivers can push and push and push and push, and just, it can be flat out racing for, the entire race, rather than doing some conserving tire wear and things like that, where, because you do get the way that the cars are in Formula One, you have differences, whereas in NASCAR, they're basically all the same. It's the same with Blancpain Endurance Series, or to some extent the WEC, where you have cars that are, they're regulated to about the same speed through balance of performance, or BOP, and it's not, you basically have the same car with some subtle differences that kind of make the big difference, or tires that might make the same difference. So, you can have kind of a standard tire that the teams can choose on, and then it comes down to the BOP of the car, so where it's strong, in what section of the circuit, and how the drivers can take advantage of that. And I think that really helps to kind of make the racing in those series a lot more interesting. And NASCAR it doesn't have the luxury of using, okay, well, we can kind of change up the way that we do BOP, or it's kind of down to, we either need to give more freedom to the manufacturers that are in the series, or we need to do something with the tires, or play around with the way that they regulate downforce and things like that. So it's not, just like in Formula One, it's not an easy problem to fix, but I think the way that stock car racing in general is kind of set up, where it's basically the same car with different manufacturer logos on the bodies, and then whatever they bring in the engine department, they kind of have a different set of things that they need to solve. So,
yeah, I think this is probably universal across pretty much every racing series. But the big call in NASCAR from the drivers and from the teams and from the fans has been to basically put the cars back in the hands of the drivers, so they actually have to do the driving. So take away some of the downforce, don't take away horsepower. You don't necessarily have to have everyone in equal equipment, but make sure that driver's skill level and talent is what shines through. And what we've seen again over the last couple of weeks of Charlotte, there's been guys who have been sort of bumped or sideways, and it's easy to make a save because these cars have so much downforce, they're just glued to the ground that's not a problem. Where I want to see the car sliding around. I want to see guys, in the cockpit really, sawing on the steering wheel, trying to get these things back under control. So I think if they could do something to at least start to chip away at that would go a long way at sort of helping to improve the quality of the racing and make those long races like the Coke 600 a little bit easier to enjoy and watch.
Sure. Yeah, and in NASCAR, that's kind of what you want too. I mean, it's oval racing, so you have the way that cars are passing are different than what you would have in oval racing. So watching drivers kind of keep great control on a car that's sliding around a bunch is kind of what I feel is the main appeal of NASCAR and stock car racing. I mean, apart from the people that watch just for the crashes, but that seems like something that they should definitely look into. I think NASCAR's kind of gone with the this kind of technology craze, and look how our cars are getting more technologically advanced. Obviously, to a less of extent than say that you get with Formula One, but they also Formula F1 kind of bills themselves as the series that uses the most tech in their cars. But yeah, I think we have some good ideas in this conversation. NASCAR, look into them, because I think you'll do well.
They're listening.
Oh, of course they are. I mean, why wouldn't they? They should be listening to their fans.
Yep, whether they actually do is questionable, and that's probably a good place to wrap up the NASCAR debate. But yeah, good discussion about this 600 and some of the other issues that are plaguing the most popular spectator sport in the country, but probably not for much longer.
Yeah, but unexpected. I was expecting that to be Coca-Cola 600 happened, and that's about it. So that was a nice conversation that evolved from that. That really wraps up the majority of our show for this week, everyone. I know we'll talk about some of the previews that are coming up for motorsport over the next week or so, as well as some sim racing events that are actually happening. The iRacing 500 is happening a week after it happened in real life. Those races are being held over Friday night, Saturday, and depending on where you're at, early Sunday morning this weekend. So if you have an iRacing membership and are interested in participating in that race, get practicing if you haven't already started. I know qualifying is already happening. Bryan and Corey are actually taking part in one or more of those races. How's that going, guys?
It's going along all right. We have laid in a qualifying time. Just for those of you who are listening haven't experienced the iRacing, these mega events as they were, how this works. Basically what they'll do is they'll take the qualifying times from all the drivers, and by 33 drivers apiece, because that's how much the Indy 500 has, they'll split them into different groups. So there'll be upwards, 1,000, over 1,000 drivers, I'm sure, split into multiple categories. So once we've set our qualifying time, we're going to try to focus more on the race setup to try to get through. They will have a top split. The absolute top fastest guys, the top 33 guys, will be in the prime race. That'll be televised on ISR TV, I guess it is, online there. But we'll be in what's known as a split further down the order. So ours won't be necessarily televised, or internet web broadcast. But we'll still enjoy it and hopefully finish and have a good result.
Yeah, we're looking forward to it. Me and Bryan were talking in practice earlier. He's run, I think, 3 of these now and finished 2 of them, so he's got a good record. I haven't run any of them. I was finally going to run the one last year, and iRacing servers crashed right before the race was about to start, so I missed my chance. So I'm still the virtual Indy 500 rookie, so actually just looking to compete and get a good finish and hopefully be able to work with Bryan through the race. But we'll have the full report on our Indy 500 race next week.
Yes, let's hope that iRacing's servers have been beefed up a little bit for this year's race, and we don't see another huge service outage as all those drivers try and connect to the iRacing servers at one time. In the world of real world racing, the United Sports Car Championship and IndyCar are actually going to both be in Detroit, racing on the street circuit there. This weekend, IndyCar is actually having a double header, so they're going to have a race on Saturday and on Sunday. So this is actually pretty close to me. I unfortunately won't be able to make it because I have stuff going on this weekend. But what can we expect from the race here in Detroit, Bryan or Corey?
As far as IndyCar, I'm not all up on the United Sports Car Series this year, but the Belle Isle Street Circuit's actually not a bad one. Relatively tight. They have alternated the format back and forth a little recently. I think we're going to have a longer straight coming off the little chicane there. So as far as the IndyCar is concerned, it's going to be a doubleheader, so there'll be a full race both Saturday and Sunday, which really provides a lot of value for the fans here. It'll be actually the only doubleheader this year. They had a few last year. Toronto was going to be one this year, but they're hosting the Pan Am Games, and due to scheduling and the fact they'll have that race in June instead of July, Toronto won't be doing a doubleheader this year. But the Detroit race, for if you're in the Detroit area and you can make it down there, really great value. You get 2 solid IndyCar races Saturday and Sunday, plus you get the United Sports Car event, which is a solid series in of itself. So I mean, it'd be a very economical and entertaining weekend for a racing fan who lives in the vicinity of Detroit, Michigan.
Yeah, a quick note about the United Sports Car race. 3 of the 4 classes are in action. The GT Le Mans cars are over in France for the Le Mans test day. But last year, their race at Detroit actually produced a really exciting finish, maybe the best of the season. Came down between 3 of the Corvette Daytona prototypes. There was some side-by-side racing, some cars in the wall, surprise tires blown on the last lap. So looked more like a stock car demolition derby than a sports car race. But that was exciting, so might be worth the watch this year. Last year, the IndyCar races in Detroit were both won by Team Penske. Power won the first one, Cashman Nevis won the second. So I wouldn't necessarily be surprised if Team Penske repeat happens again this year.
All right, well, everyone, that is this week's Rev Limit podcast. A little bit shorter than... Is it a little bit shorter? Yeah, it's a little bit shorter than we normally do, which... might be a good thing depending on what you think. So
you made it this far, I congratulate you.
Yeah, I know. Eventually, when we first started talking, we were like, yeah, let's do a podcast. I know Brian's initial thought was, yeah, let's make it half an hour, and we've gone well over that. These first 4 ones that we've done. So I think if we can get it, I think we'll probably shoot for around an hour eventually. But yeah,
we're at 105. I know we're about an hour right now, so
yeah, we're pretty close. You know, we're getting there. But yeah, as always, if you have feedback for us on ways to improve the podcast, I know Brian just got himself a brand new shiny microphone, so his audio quality should be improved for this episode.
Exactly, you guys are getting the full Brian experience right now. Yeah, that got weird.
It wasn't before.
No, you're getting at most 75% Brian.
Well, at maybe next week we'll have 80% or 85% Brian. But until then, you'll have to you can follow us on the social medias I'm sure I'll be I'm not competing in the Indy 500, but I'm going to be planning on watching Brian and Corey and their whatever stint they manage or whatever split they managed to get into. Maybe it'll be number 1 and they can watch it on the official live stream, but
it won't be.
I was just trying to be a little optimistic, you know. But so yeah, I know I'll be live tweeting out all of their escapades, and hopefully they make it through the whole race. But you can follow me if you're all of our stuff has been under our pretty faces if you're watching this on YouTube, and if you're listening to it via audio download, I'm at Tweets by Ant. Brian is at RevLimit Brian, and Corey is at CDavisWX. And actually, Corey, I think, just put out last week a new blog update that he tweeted out. So it's a pretty good read. Go check it out. All right, that's it. That's episode 4. Again, like I said, we've made it a month of these now, so we are officially hooked and in a groove. So now we can't ever stop. Which means we'll see you next week on the Rev Limit podcast. Thanks for listening.